Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing movies never existed. Not just no cinemas or no streaming, just the entire idea never happened. And before we talk about everything that disappears, I want you to think about one specific feeling that disappears with it. You know, when a film ends and the credits start rolling and the music comes in and you just sit there. You don't reach for your phone, you don't say anything, you're not ready to move yet, not ready to go back to being yourself. Because for the last 2 hours, you were somewhere and someone completely else. And coming back to your own seat, your own body, your own evening feels like waking up from a dream you weren't finished having. And it doesn't stop when the credits end. You walk out of the cinema and you're still inside it. You're in the car, but your mind is still in that world. You get home and the film follows you in, sits with you while you eat, stays with you while you try to sleep. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes you wake up the next morning and it's still there, still sitting somewhere just behind your eyes, like it moved in and decided to stay for a while. That feeling, that specific, strange, beautiful feeling of a story that followed you home. In a world without movies, nobody on earth would know what that feels like. 8 billion people alive right now, and not a single one of them would have ever felt that. And that's just one feeling. One tiny corner of what movies gave us. Think about how many moments like this exist. The film that found you at exactly the right time, when life felt stuck and something on a screen made you feel like, okay, maybe it gets better. The film that changed what you wanted from your own life, that made you look up from the screen and think, I want to feel that, I want to be that, I want to go there. The film that became part of a friendship that you and one specific person watched together, and now it belongs to both of you. The one you rewatch every year, not because it's the greatest film ever made, but because it's yours. None of that exists in a world without movies. None of it. And when you really let that land, it starts to feel like something much bigger than entertainment disappeared. Because here's the question I keep coming back to. If movies never existed, would you be the same person you are today? The values you hold, the way you understand people whose lives look like nothing like yours, the person you quietly decided you wanted to become. And I don't think the answer is yes. And I don't think that's a small thing. We've been calling movies entertainment for 100 years. I think that's the wrong word. I think movies build people quietly, slowly over an entire lifetime. And this video is about exactly how that happens. In 1895, two brothers showed a room full of people, a train arriving at a station. That was it. No story or characters, just a train pulling into a station in black and white for 60 seconds. Auguste and Louis Lumiere had built a machine that could capture moving images and project them onto a wall. And the train was what they chose to show the world. The people watching reportedly ran, physically ran from the room because they thought the train was going to come through the wall and hit them. Adults running from a projection of a train that wasn't there. And here's the part that makes it stranger. The Lumiere brothers looked at what they had built and genuinely believed that it had no future. He called cinema an invention without a future, a curiosity, something people would find amusing for a season, the way you find a magic trick amusing, and then move on from it completely. If you were standing in that room in 1895, you might have agreed with him. What actually happened instead is one of the strangest stories in human history. That novelty, that thing its own inventors had written off, didn't disappear. It found its way out of the carnival and into dedicated theater. The films got longer, stories started appearing, and then sound arrived and then color. And before long, people weren't just watching moving images anymore. They were watching entire worlds. Then it got so embedded into daily life that entire industries formed around it. Entire cities shaped themselves around it. Entire generations defined themselves through it. And the people who were supposed to see it coming, the inventors, businessmen, critics, kept underestimating it, kept treating it like a passing phase. It kept proving them wrong. Sometimes I try to imagine taking one of those people from that room and dropping them into today. Not explaining anything, just letting them look around. What would break their brain first? A cinema screen the size of a building? A streaming service containing thousands of films? A fictional character recognized in almost every country on earth? Tens of thousands of people lining up at midnight to watch a story they already know? Or maybe the strangest thing wouldn't be the scale of it. Maybe it would be realizing that the little novelty they ran away from somehow became one of the main ways human beings understood themselves. Most things that start as tricks, yes, tricks. That's just how it goes. Cinema had no right to be different, and yet here we are. Which makes me think that technology was never really the point. Plenty of impressive technology has come and gone without changing how humanity sees itself. So what was it? Why did this one survive and then go so much further than just surviving? The real question isn't how movies made it. The real question is, why did we need them so badly? Here's a question I want you to actually sit with for a second. Where did you first learn what courage looked like? Not the definition of the word or any image. The first time you saw someone do something genuinely difficult, something that caused them something real, even though they were terrified of it. Where did that come from? Think about it before you answer. Because for most people, if they are honest, The answer isn't school or a textbook or something that, or it isn't a lesson anyone sat them down and taught them. For a lot of us, the first time we truly understood what courage looked like, we were sitting in the dark watching someone who wasn't real do something we hoped we'd be capable of ourselves. And it wasn't just courage. Think about what sacrifice looks like, what loyalty feels like, what it means to do the right thing when doing the right thing costs you everything. We like to think we are shaped by real things, real experiences, real events, and not fictional characters or made up stories. And yet, nobody handed us a manual for any of that. But somewhere along the way, we learned it. We developed instincts for it. We built feelings around it. We formed our earliest ideas of who we wanted to be, partly from people who never existed, in stories that never happened. And the strange thing is, those lessons didn't feel like lessons, they felt like feelings, which is exactly why they stayed. Because that's what separates stories from every other way humans have tried to teach each other anything. A textbook tells you what courage means, a story makes you feel it, and what you feel, you remember. And what you remember shapes you. Most of us just never stopped to trace it back. The second thing movies gave us was the ability to imagine a life bigger than the one we are living. How many dreams in your life started as someone else's story? Really think about that. How many people watched a film set somewhere they had never been and felt something shift, a pull towards something they couldn't quite name yet? How many people watched someone create something, build something, fight for something on screen and felt for it the first time? I want that, not just to watch it, but to actually go after it. Movies didn't just reflect the world back at us, they showed us versions of the world we hadn't considered yet, possibilities we hadn't given ourselves permission to want. There's a generation of filmmakers who became filmmakers because they watched films as children and felt something crack open inside them. A generation of travelers whose first real idea of a place they desperately needed to see came from a screen. A generation of people who decided what kind of person they wanted to become, partly by watching the kind of person they wanted to become in a story. Dreams need a starting point, and for a lot of people, that starting point was a darkened room and someone else's imagination. And then there's the third thing, the one that's hardest to articulate, but maybe the most true. How much of who you are came from things that never actually happened? Think about the characters you measured yourself against, the stories that became shorthand between you and the people you love, the films so woven into your life that they feel less like something you watch and more like something you live. Movies became part of how we describe ourselves. You meet someone new, and within 20 minutes, you're asking what films they love. Because somewhere along the way, we all learned that what stories a person carries says something true about who they are. Entire friendships built on a shared love of the same film. Entire relationships with a movie that belongs to just two people. Entire families with a film they return to every single year, not because it's the greatest ever made, but because it's theirs. Stories became identity, characters became mirrors, and the line between the lives we lived and the lives we watched got quietly permanently blurred. So when people say movies are just entertainment, I think what they mean is they haven't looked closely enough yet, because the values you hold, the dreams you chase, the person you decided you wanted to become, more of that came from stories than most of us are comfortable admitting. That's not entertainment. That's something much closer to how we actually became people. And maybe that's why movies survived when everything said they shouldn't. Not because the technology was impressive, not because the industry was powerful, but because they weren't just showing us stories, they were helping us understand ourselves. Which raises a question the Lumiere brothers could never have predicted. What happens when those same stories start helping us understand someone else entirely? You will spend your entire life inside one perspective, your own. Every experience you have, every feeling, fear, moment of joy or grief or confusion, all of it filtered through one single pair of eyes, yours. You don't get to choose which life you're born into, which country or which family, which circumstances you're born in. You get one, and you spend your whole life looking out from inside it, trying to understand a world full of people who are each looking out from inside their own. That's one of the hardest things about being human. Not the suffering or uncertainty or even the fear of death, but this, the fundamental inability to fully know what it feels like to be someone else. You can listen, you can try, you can imagine, but you can't actually get there. The wall between one human consciousness and another is one of the oldest walls in existence. You can never directly experience another person's life, and for most of human history, nobody had figured out how to get through it. Then stories got good enough to try. Think about what happens when a film really works. Not a film you watch, but a film you disappear into for hours. The wall comes down, you stop being yourself sitting in a seat in a cinema or in your house, and you become someone else. You have never lost a child, but you have cried when a character did, because something in you actually felt it. A grief that wasn't yours, landing somewhere real inside you. That's no longer just imagination, that's something closer to experience. You have never been an aging man watching the world move on without him, watching entire chapters of his life quietly disappear, wondering where the time went. Yet a film put you inside that loneliness so completely that for 2 hours you didn't just understand it, you felt it from the inside. You've never been a struggling musician or an astronaut watching the earth from a distance so vast it makes everything feel both meaningless and unbearably precious. And yet, you have felt pieces of all of those lives. Actual feeling you have felt. And here's what I think that actually means. Most people assume empathy is about pain and understanding suffering, about seeing the hardest parts of your life that aren't yours. But that's only half of it, because movies didn't just let you feel other people's grief, they let you feel other people's ambitions as well. The obsession of someone who wants something so badly it consumes them. Other people's loneliness, the specific quiet of someone who has everything and still feels completely alone. Other people's joy, a kind of happiness so particular to a life but so different to yours that you never would have known it existed if a story hadn't shown you. Other people's regret, hope, love, the entire width of human experience compressed into few hours and handed to you in the dark. Movies didn't just help us feel other people's pain, they let us feel other people's lives. And I think that matters more than we have given it credit for. Because here's what actually happens when you have spent enough time inside enough stories. You start to find it harder to completely dismiss a life that isn't yours. Because somewhere in the back of your mind, you have been there. A film has put you inside all of those emotions. And even though you know it was fiction, even though you know it never happened, that feeling was real, and feelings change people. The Lumiere brothers built a machine that could project moving images onto a wall. That's what they thought they were building. What they actually built without knowing it or without any intention was something humanity had been trying to build for centuries, a way to temporarily free ourselves from the prison of our own perspective. A machine that could take one human life and for few hours let another human being borrow it. That's not technology, that's not entertainment. That's the closest thing we have ever built to actually understanding each other. The average person gets one life. Movies quietly gave us hundreds more. And maybe that's the most human thing cinema ever did. Everything we have talked about so far has happened inside people, inside the person sitting in the dark, inside the mind that borrowed someone else's life for ours, inside the values that quietly formed, or inside the dreams that slowly took shape. But at some point, something interesting happened. The story stopped staying inside people, they escaped. Think about New Zealand. A filmmaker looked at it and saw Middle Earth. Millions of people looked at Middle Earth and saw New Zealand. And suddenly people were traveling across the world to visit a place they first fell in love with in a story. A fictional world changed the movement of real human beings. That's a strange kind of power. And it wasn't just places that changed. Somewhere a child sits in a dark room watching a film. They don't know it yet, but something is happening to them. 20 years later, they are behind a camera or in an editing suite or writing a score for a film that will one day sit in another dark room and do the same thing to someone else. The filmmakers who changed cinema were first changed by it. The composers whose music made you cry in the dark heard music in a cinema first and felt something shift. The writers, the animators, directors, editors, almost all of them started the same way. A story stopped being something they consumed and became something they decided to dedicate their entire life to. That's not influence, that's creation. Stories didn't just inspire people, they built entire industries out of those inspired people. But the biggest thing movies built isn't a place, isn't an industry, it isn't even a career. It's something harder to measure and maybe more important than any of it. Think about what happens when two strangers discover they love the same film. Something shifts immediately. The distance between them closes, not because they have shared an experience, because they have shared a world. The same characters, the same moments, the same lines that hit them in exactly the same places, even though they watched it alone in completely different rooms, in completely different lives. For a few hours, millions of people saw the same world, fell in love with the same characters, felt the same emotions at the same moments. That's more than connection, that's more than culture, that's a shared reality. And very few things in human history have ever created one at that scale. So when you look at the world around you, the places people travel to, the careers people build, the language people share, the connections people make with strangers across every border and a background imaginable, a surprising amount of it traces back to a story, to someone sitting in a dark room watching something on a screen and being changed by it, and then going out into the world and changing it too. The stories change the people change the world, and somewhere along the way, the line between the two disappeared. At the start of this video, I asked you to imagine a world where movies never existed, not just no cinemas or no streaming, a world where the entire idea never happened. I want you to go back there for a second because now you know what that world is actually missing. Not just the films, the values that formed in the dark without feeling like lessons, the dream that started as someone else's story, the borrowed perspectives that made it slightly harder to dismiss a life that wasn't yours, the shared worlds that turned strangers into people with somewhere to start. all of it gone. And then think about everything you brought back. Every time you walked out of a cinema or closed a laptop or laid in the dark after a film ended, something came back with you. Not always something you noticed, but something. A new way of seeing a kind of person you'd never understood before. A dream you didn't have before you sat down. A hope that arrived through someone else's story and quietly became your own. You didn't leave those borrowed lives behind when the credits rolled. Pieces of them came back with you, and over an entire lifetime of stories, those pieces add up. They become part of how you see the world, part of how you understand people, part of who you are. The average person gets one life, but if you have watched enough stories, you have also lived pieces of hundreds of others, and none of those pieces disappeared when the story ended. They stayed. They changed how you move through your own life without you ever realizing it was happening. I think that's worth being grateful for.